Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Hub. I'm Brennan and today we're doing another team preview. Now we're looking at the Detroit Red Wings. Now it goes without saying that the Detroit Red Wings had a really bad season this past year. Statistically one of the worst in NHL history. But they did actually have a pretty good offseason and they could end up being a better team this upcoming season. By no means do I think that they're a playoff team. They'll definitely still be one of the worst, but I'm not sure if they'll finish dead last again. We're going to start off with what they added. Now, the Detroit Red Wings signed themselves a pretty good goaltender in Thomas Greiss. Greiss put up very solid numbers with the New York Islanders these past few seasons, and even before the Barry Trotz system, he was actually pretty good for the Islanders. So Greiss is a solid goaltender. He is going to be the starting goaltender there in all likelihood, or maybe a 1A, 1B situation with Jonathan Bernier. Greiss is definitely an upgrade on Jimmy Howard. They also signed Vladislav Nemesnikov. Nemesnikov is probably going to slot into that top six and is a really good pickup for Detroit, kind of a low-risk, high-reward signing since Nemesnikov did put up some really good totals in Tampa Bay. Yzerman is familiar with the player, so it does make sense why he went out and signed him. They also signed Troy Stecher. That really helps out their blue line. John Merrill. That also really helps out their blue line. So adding those two guys should kind of, prevent some of that goals against. And overall, they shouldn't be allowing as many goals as they did this past season. Because, those are, three solid additions right there when it comes to goaltending and defense. But they also signed Bobby Ryan, who I think is another low-risk, high-reward. Bobby Ryan just came off of a fantastic story with the Ottawa Senators, beating his addiction and then coming back and getting a hat trick. It was one of my favorite games of the year, and I'm really rooting for Bobby Ryan to have a really good year. I'd like to see him bounce back. I don't think he's ever going to be the player he was in Anaheim again, but maybe he could end up, reaching 40 points, well, the equivalent to that over an 82-game schedule. So maybe, between 20 and 25 points over a 56-game schedule. They also got Mark Stahl from the New York Rangers. Now, Stahl was a cap dump for the Rangers, and Detroit did end up getting a couple second-round picks to take on Mark Stahl. So that's definitely a win for Detroit. They can afford to pay him, and Stahl should only help out their blue line a little bit by just, more depth, which is never a bad thing. Detroit really didn't lose that much either. They did lose Madison Bowie. Trevor Daley ended up retiring, and they did buy out Justin Abdelkader. Abdelkader really wasn't fitting in well anymore. Regression really hit him hard, and that contract was very cumbersome. They decided not to qualify Madison Bowie. Hasn't really fit in well in Detroit after he did show some promise in Washington, but I guess Detroit just wasn't the place for him. Trevor Daley did end up retiring. And they also chose not to qualify Brendan Perlini. Perlini really didn't show much at all in Detroit, and it makes sense why they didn't choose to qualify him. So overall, they really didn't lose that much. I don't think these are guys that Detroit fans are going to be complaining about losing. So overall, as far as their free agency and everything goes, Detroit actually had a really good free agency, picking up a lot of good depth pieces that should help their overall lineup. Now, Detroit's top six is pretty middling. They're led by Dylan Larkin, who's probably their future captain. Larkin is a really good player. I'm not sure if he is a true first-line center, but he can definitely grow into that. He's very good at both ends of the ice, and I do expect the offensive totals to bounce back a little bit. Larkin does have a lot of potential. He's very fast. He's got good hands, good shot, and his overall game is really good for a young player. I know Detroit fans are really big on Larkin, and I can see why. He's kind of the face of that franchise right now, and he's going to be the nenext captain, so Detroit fans should be expecting big things from Larkin in the upcoming years. There's also Anthony Mantha, who they re-signed to a pretty long-term extension. Mantha is a really good power forward. The only problem with Mantha is if he's able to stay healthy, but when healthy, he's actually arguably Detroit's best offensive forward. Mantha can put up a lot of goals and a lot of points, and overall, he's a very noticeable player. He's a big player and a very unique player in the NHL. And then there's Tyler Bertuzzi, who had himself a good little year. I believe he did end up making it to the All-Star game. Bertuzzi is a good player. I'm not sure how much of his points totals are inflated by playing with those two guys, since Detroit really doesn't have better options on that top line, but I do think that Bertuzzi is a good top six winger in his own right. He's an agitator, not necessarily a favorite of other teams, but if you're a Detroit fan, you probably really like Tyler Bertuzzi. But then, so those three guys are pretty solid, but then the top six gets a little weaker after that. I do think that Vladislav Nemesnikov slides into that top six. Robbie Fabry is probably in that top six as well, so those two guys being in your top six, I'm not sure how to feel about that. I don't think that those guys are true top six forwards, more like middle six forwards at best probably, but Fabry did look really good in his few games with Detroit, so, perhaps he could actually end up turning himself into a true top six player. He definitely has that potential, and it wouldn't shock me. I think Philip Zadina is probably going to work his way into this top 6 this upcoming season as well. Zadina being a 6th overall pick, he's got a lot of offensive potential, and Detroit is going to expect him to be one of those key, franchise cornerstone pieces for them. Zadina was good in the games he played this year and should probably only take a step forward next year as well. Now, Detroit's top 4 is where a weakness in the lineup is really present. Filip Hronek is actually a really good young defenseman, though, who's easily Detroit's best defender this past season and has quite a bit of offensive potential for a blue liner. But then I would have Dennis Chbalski. He probably gets back in there. He did spend the year in the AHL, but I think that was more so to preserve his development, not playing for a terrible team. But I do think he probably fits his way back into that top 4. And then their 2 additions of John Merrill and Troy Stecher probably end up being top 4 guys as well. And to be honest, I'm not sure if either one of those guys are top 4 guys, so it kind of speaks to the lack of defensive depth on Detroit's roster. Now, the goaltending has definitely improved for Detroit. Thomas Greiss is an obvious upgrade on Jimmy Howard, and Jonathan Bernier was actually pretty good for Detroit last year. Detroit definitely played a lot better in front of Bernier than they did Howard, and Bernier was actually able to have a decent record considering how bad Detroit was, and actually put up pretty decent numbers. So while this tandem isn't that great, it's not necessarily bad either. It's probably still a bottom 10 tandem in the NHL, but that being said, I don't think that goaltending is a particular weakness in their lineup. These guys are both kind of stopgaps, though, and I'm wondering when the next, young, good goaltender for Detroit is going to come along. Now, as far as Detroit's best players and core goes, I would say that that top line of Bertuzzi, Larkin, and Mantha is definitely the 3 key guys there. All those guys are pretty good in their own right. Mantha and Larkin are pretty fantastic as well. And then I would have Filip Hronek and Thomas Greiss to round out this core 5. Hronek is a good blue liner. I don't know if he's ever going to be a legit number 1 blue liner, but I think that's probably what Moritz Seider is going to be. And Thomas Greiss is a solid goaltender in his own right. Now, the players that I want to talk about for the Detroit Red Wings are kind of all prospects, but I'm going to start off with Lucas Raymond. Now, Raymond was kind of the consolation prize for getting 4th overall, even though they were the worst team in the NHL, but Raymond is a pretty damn good consolation prize. His player comparable is easily Mitch Marner, and there's no reason why he isn't going to be able to get close to those point totals that Marner can put up. Raymond could end up being one of the best pure playmakers in the NHL. I'm not sure if he plays with Detroit this upcoming year, though. He could end up staying over in Sweden, but if he does end up playing for Detroit, he should probably slot into their top 6 actually, and will really make their top 6 a lot better. Raymond is a very highly touted prospect, and I know Detroit fans are excited about having him. But then I want to get into Joe Veleno. Now, Joe Veleno did end up falling to Detroit 30th overall in the 2018 entry draft. That was a big shock to me. I thought Veleno was probably going in the top 15, but he ended up falling. And he's put up really good numbers in Europe and could actually be a dark horse to make this Detroit team. If he does, that definitely helps out their center depth, since there isn't, a lot of good center prospects in the Detroit organization, and not really any good centers behind Dylan Larkin on the team. So if Veleno can come in and maybe be that second-line center of the future, and maybe even present, that can really help out Detroit's outlook of the future and now as well. But the big prospect for them, I think, is Moritz Seider. Now, Seider was definitely a little bit of an off-the-board pick in the 2019 entry draft, but I think people realize why now. Moritz Seider is one of the best defensive prospects in the NHL. His offensive game is strong, but his defensive game is really impressive. He will probably end up being the best German-born defender of all time, unless a really highly touted German defender comes along in one of the next few drafts. But for now, Moritz Seider just oozes potential. I fully expect him to play for Detroit this upcoming season, and could very well end up working his way into the top 4. Moritz Seider is definitely that blue liner of the future for Detroit, and by all means, he should be fantastic. Now, despite all that Detroit added, I would definitely still have them as a rebuilder. They are going to be one of the bottom teams in the NHL this upcoming season. I'm not sure if they finish dead last. You look at the roster, they probably will, but it's really hard to finish dead last in back-to-back years, believe it or not. It's very uncommon, so maybe one of the LA teams ends up falling a bit farther from them. Maybe it's Buffalo or New Jersey or Ottawa. But either way, Detroit is definitely kind of pegged as potentially being the worst team in the NHL again. And when you look at their roster, it's easy to see why. Outside of a few guys, and there is decent depth there, there's not a lot of star power, and there's not a lot of good top 6 forwards. a true starting goaltender, or good top four defenders. There's a lot of prospects in the Detroit organization, and I have full confidence in their general manager, Steve Yzerman, to turn the direction of the franchise around. He's already begun that. Guys like Zadina and Raymond and Seider should end up being very key pieces for them, and they all have star power potential. So if those guys can pan out, then Detroit's going to look really good in a few years, but for now, they're definitely still in some of the darkest days of the rebuild. But I do think that last season was probably the darkest days, and they should be a little bit better this year, especially since they did have a good offseason. They did add a lot and shore up a lot of their depth. But that does it for today's video. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys later. Bye for now.